In most ways, Miranda Lappin is like any other 3-year-old girl.
Hello.
She likes toys, ballet, and picture books.
And there's duckies.
But in one way, she's very different.
What is that?
Miranda has breakfast, lunch, and dinner through a feeding tube.
Take a bite.
Not because she's sick, but because she simply refuses to eat.
When was the last time she actually ate something?
At 11 months old.
That was more than 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, just the tube?
Just the tube. She totally relies on it to keep alive.
It wasn't always that way. When Denise and Steve Lepan brought their 3rd child home from the hospital, Miranda was a healthy, happy baby. But at 11 months old, everything changed. Suddenly, the mere sight of food would send their sweet-tempered child into a violent rage.
It was like this monster would come out when it came time to feed her. She would hit at us, she would kick us. We wouldn't let her wear shoes during feeding time because she would get kicked so bad.
Turn yourself around in the high chair.
Miranda's story may sound unique, but it's not.
Can you eat some more bites?
Experts estimate that as many as 2 in 100 children will bite, scream, even force themselves to throw up to avoid eating. And these children are not just picky eaters. They're suffering from feeding disorders as serious and as deadly as anorexia nervosa, warns child psychologist Kathleen Piazza.
There really are children out there that, if left untreated, would eat nothing by mouth and would eventually die.
Miranda was almost one of those children.
I remember going to bed at night and I would sit by her crib and I would cry and I'd say to Steve, she's not going to be alive in the morning. You know, there's no way she's going to live through this. She's not eating.
And what did you think was going on?
I had no idea. I had no clue. I never heard of a kid just not eating for no reason.
Nor had Sanjay and Naina Punkshay until their 4-year-old daughter Sonali also stopped eating at 8 months old. One day she was drinking milk, the next day clenching her jaws, refusing everything, even water. Though both parents are doctors, they couldn't find out why.
So we even put stuff in physicians online, and that was even more frustrating that no one has an answer, even when you put it to other physicians all across the country.
As the Punkshays desperately sought a diagnosis, their only child was wasting away. A feeding tube saved her life, but didn't solve the problem.
So the good news was she was getting fed, she was getting nutrition, but the bad news was that you still didn't know what was going on.
Exactly. They did multiple tests, and everything was negative. So here we are without an answer.
For the parents of these children, the search for answers can be a long, lonely, and disheartening process. This feeding disorder is so newly recognized that many doctors have never even heard of it, and the few who have are just beginning to understand the causes.
Some of these children have experienced medical problems that have caused eating to be painful.
Finish your bite.
And so when a plate of food is presented to them, an alarm bell goes off that says, pain, not pleasure, is coming.
Some of those medical problems stem from premature births or intestinal ailments like acid reflux and projectile vomiting. But what about the thousands of children who have no history of physical troubles? Why are they refusing food? Incredibly, some experts suggest it's because they don't get hungry.
The parts of the brain that signal to you and I to get hungry and to eat aren't working the same in these children. That's certainly possible.
Oh, there he goes.
And compounding the problem, Dr. Piazza says, is that many of these children soon realize that refusing food can help get them attention they crave.
A child who's not very motivated to eat learns, hey, not only do I not have to eat, but I can get people hopping and jumping and singing and dancing when I don't eat. And that's very powerful for the child.
Aren't you hungry?
And so the feeding problem evolves into a behavioral problem, like with Denise Lepan and Miranda. A simple lunch can flare into a battle of wills.
Come on, take a bite. If you keep pushing it, she'll get nastier and nastier, and it just kind of, nothing goes in.
Let's just put our hands down and let's take a bite. Take a bite.
It's just frustration because I know she can do this. She just won't do it.
Miranda, take a bite. Come on, take a bite.
These exhausting power struggles usually end with Denise walking away in defeat.
I think she has a stronger will than I do sometimes because she'll keep it up for hours. We can try feeding for hours and hours and she'll sit here and fight. Well, that was a big lunch, huh, Miranda?
But once out of the high chair, Miranda is once again a typical happy toddler. But her mother, like others, is not as resilient.
What was it like to admit your child to the hospital and see malnutrition written on her chart?
Major failure as a mother. You know, you think of these people who are arrested because they're not feeding their kids, and you know, I see those shows on the news, and it brings you to tears. And you know, I don't want to be felt labeled as one of them because we did everything in our power to get her to eat.
Gordon and Michelle Hecht also tried everything imaginable to get their 2-year-old daughter Adrienne to eat.
One more?
Since birth, she would not breastfeed and refused formula. Michelle blamed herself.
People kept telling me that it shouldn't, you know, that doesn't happen. Kids will eat when they're hungry, and I thought, well, maybe I'm just doing something wrong.
Racked with guilt, the Hecks did what many families do. They isolated themselves.
I didn't go back to work because of her feeding. You know, I ended up staying home because it was impossible for any caregiver to feed her.
There are few places for these families to go for help. Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore is one of just a handful of facilities with this specific kind of program. Dr. Piazza is the director.
When parents come to us, they're really at the end of their ropes. I mean, I've had many parents who've driven to other states, who've gone to faith healers and alternative medicine practitioners to try to get some answers.
You ready to go? We can play.
Up to 80 kids wind up here every year. Boys, girls, children of all races. By the time Sonali arrived back in November of 1998, she'd been on a feeding tube for almost 2 years. At first, says Dr. Piazza, Sonali showed classic symptoms: crying, gagging, and vomiting at will.
What we found with her is she appeared to vomit to get her parents' attention. But when we asked them not to pay attention to her when she vomited, her vomiting stopped.
Psychologists spent hours a day trying to break Sonali's negative behaviors, using a system of rewards. For every bite, she would get 30 seconds of positive reinforcement, either a toy, a video, or verbal praise. Sonali did not give in easily. But gradually, she began to respond. About a month into the program, Sonali finally began swallowing small spoonfuls of applesauce.
Sonali, take a bite. Good job, swallow.
That was the happiest, I think the happiest moment of our life. She still had gagging and vomiting, but she gave in and started accepting whatever was given to her.
Today, more than a year later, Nina is following the same precise feeding techniques she learned at Kennedy Krieger. And it's paying off. Sonali now only requires a feeding tube at night.
If we had never taken her there, I think she would not be eating. She would be a teenager with a feeding tube.
Michelle Hecht and Denise LePan still worry that could be the case with their daughters. Although both children went through treatment, they are still 100% tube-fed.
It's sad to say it just seems to be the way of life anymore. It's just the way it is.
But doctors at Kennedy Krieger say about 86% of children who go through their program do improve. Whether or not they'll grow up to be healthy eaters is another question, since they've yet to follow any of these children into adulthood. But as researchers struggle to find out more about this mysterious disorder, the Punkshays vowed their daughter will overcome it and be cured.
Do you expect that you'll see the day when Sonali will come in and say, "Mom, I'm so hungry, I want a big dinner"?
I'm waiting for that day. I don't know when that's going to be, but I'm enthusiastic that that day is going to come.